What if I told you that stupidity isn't simply a lack of intelligence, but something far more dangerous? A hidden force that can hijack even the brightest minds and transform them into agents of chaos? Imagine this. What if the biggest threat to our civilization isn't evil people doing evil deeds, but ordinary people who have quietly stopped thinking for themselves? Picture it for a second. A respected scientist with a wall full of degrees suddenly begins spreading deadly conspiracy theories. A compassionate teacher once devoted to nurturing young minds starts pushing toxic beliefs that harm her students. A loving parent, wanting only the best for their children, starts making decisions that put those same children at risk. These aren't cartoon villains. They're intelligent, kind, well-intentioned human beings who have fallen under a sinister spell. Have you ever wondered how someone so smart could make such destructive choices? Or maybe you felt that pull yourself, going along with the crowd because it felt easier than questioning it. Be honest, has that ever happened to you? If so, drop a comment below. Let's see how many of us have faced that same quiet temptation. What we're describing isn't random. German pastor and thinker Dietrich Bonhoeffer called it the power of stupidity, and he believed it was one of the most terrifying forces in human society. He had watched an entire nation, Nazi Germany, transform before his very eyes, not because of pure evil, but because normal, educated, even cultured people surrendered their capacity for independent thought. You might think this is just history, but consider this. A professional engineer in your city sharing false medical advice on Facebook. A corporate manager you know reposting hateful memes without checking if they're true. Or an ordinary friend following a social trend so blindly that they put themselves or their family in danger. These are today's examples of how functional stupidity seeps into our lives, no matter how educated or smart we think we are. And this is not just speculation. Back in 1961, a researcher named Stanley Milgram ran a series of experiments at Yale University. Volunteers, just everyday people, were told by an authority figure to deliver what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. Even when screams filled the room, 65% of them kept going, administering what they thought could be deadly shocks. These weren't monsters or sociopaths. They were regular people, momentarily giving up their moral judgment. Now pause for a second. What would you have done in that situation? Do you think you'd resist, or would you obey too? Think about it. And if you feel brave enough, share your answer in the comments. This same mechanism, surrendering our ability to think independently under social pressure, is exactly what Bonhoeffer saw in 1930s Germany. It was so powerful he wrote from his prison cell in 1943. Against stupidity we are defenceless. Neither protest nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reason falls on deaf ears. Those words hit hard, don't they? And what makes them even scarier is this. Bonhoeffer wasn't talking about random ignorance. He was talking about a virus of the mind that spreads even among the most rational people. Let's recap before we dive deeper. Bonhoeffer believed the true danger wasn't just evil intentions, but the surrender of thinking. And once that happens, intelligence itself can be twisted into a tool for harm. So let me ask you, do you agree with Bonhoeffer that the biggest threat is not evil, but the collapse of critical thought? Share your view below. Because in the next part, we'll explore how social structures, technology, and even your own brain might quietly push you toward this intellectual surrender. If this topic is sparking something inside you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. We'll go even deeper into the psychology of human behaviour, and you won't want to miss it. Bonhoeffer wasn't the type of philosopher who spent his days in an ivory tower debating abstract ideas. He was a pastor, deeply engaged with his community, who watched as the society he loved was hollowed out by an invisible infection. Born in 1906 into a highly educated family, his father was a prominent psychiatrist and neurologist, Bonhoeffer had every reason to believe that education and rational thinking could save a nation from madness. But what he witnessed in Nazi Germany broke that faith completely. He saw highly respected, educated Germans, professors, priests, doctors, engineers, throwing their support behind policies and leaders who contradicted everything they claimed to value. These were not ignorant peasants manipulated by propaganda, but respected intellectuals who willingly surrendered their critical thinking to a dangerous movement. Imagine what that must have felt like. Watching people you trust and admire lose their moral anchor, seeing them transform into instruments of something horrifying. That sense of betrayal burned into Bonhoeffer's soul. And so, while imprisoned in 1943 for resisting the Nazi regime, he wrote words that still shock us today. Evil always carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. But stupidity is different. It believes it is doing good, making it immune to correction. Take a moment to let that sink in. Evil is eventually confronted because it causes discomfort, conflict, and resistance. But stupidity, convinced it is right, righteous, even noble, never questions itself. That makes it far more dangerous. Let's pause here and reflect. Have you ever met someone who is absolutely convinced they're doing the right thing, yet their choices clearly cause harm? Have you ever been that person yourself? If you're comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might resonate with someone else watching right now. Bonhoeffer's warning feels even more relevant today because our society has evolved tools of persuasion that make surrendering our thinking easier than ever. Unlike Nazi Germany's radio broadcasts and newspapers, we live in an age where social media algorithms decide what we see, what we believe, and even what we ignore. These systems feed us content that confirms what we already think, rewarding us with dopamine hits every time we agree with the herd. Can you think of a moment when your social feed seemed perfectly tailored to flatter your worldview? That's not an accident. That is the business model. These platforms profit when you react instantly, not when you think carefully. It gets worse. Studies have shown that false information spreads faster and farther than truth online. Why? Because lies are often simpler, more emotionally satisfying, and easier to share. And the moment you share them, you help build a system that drowns out nuance in favour of outrage. Take a breath here and consider this. How many times have you scrolled, liked, and shared something without checking if it was actually true? If you're willing, admit it in the comments. No shame, because we've all been there. Bonhoeffer saw the same pattern in group behaviour. He observed that individuals, perfectly rational on their own, would abandon their critical faculties once they became part of a collective. The group's energy seemed to override their personal judgment, creating what he described as a kind of collective blindness. Modern research backs this up. Solomon Asch in the 1950s ran famous experiments showing that 75% of people will agree with a group giving obviously wrong answers at least once. When we stand alone, we think clearly. When we stand in a crowd, we often think like the crowd. And today the crowd isn't just physical. It's digital, it's global, and it's fed by algorithms that know exactly how to hook our attention. Those algorithms are a new kind of authority figure, replacing the radio propaganda of Bonhoeffer's time with personalised manipulation at an unimaginable scale. That's why his insight matters so much. Because the systems we live in, from social media to political slogans to 24-hour news, all reward emotional reactions over critical analysis. If you feel yourself being pulled into that stream of instant emotion, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. This is exactly how functional stupidity takes hold. Now think about it. Do you believe you're truly free from this influence? Or do you, like the rest of us, feel your thinking sometimes bend to social pressure? Share your reflections. You might help someone else recognize the same pattern in themselves. And if you're finding this conversation valuable, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who cares about independent thinking. In the final section, we'll talk about how to actively resist this powerful force and protect your mind. If we know that our brains, our systems, and even our social lives conspire to make independent thinking so difficult, then what can we do? Bonhoeffer believed that the answer required what he called costly grace, a willingness to think for ourselves, even when it hurts, even when it means standing alone. In today's world, that advice sounds almost prophetic, because the reality is we are not just fighting human propaganda anymore. We are fighting systems designed by artificial intelligence, capable of predicting and manipulating our emotional triggers with terrifying precision. Every scroll, every click, Every hesitation is recorded and analysed to keep us hooked on shortcuts and certainty. That's why I'm asking you directly. Have you ever felt like you were being played by your own feed? Maybe you started believing something simply because everyone else did. Share it below, because talking about these experiences can break the spell. The moment we realise how predictable we have become, we can begin to fight back. Bonhoeffer died because he refused to let someone else think for him. He was hanged just weeks before Germany fell, and his last words, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life," remind us that the price of intellectual freedom can be painfully high. Yet the alternative is worse, a world where people stop being fully human and become, as Bonhoeffer said, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force is strongest at the moment. That's why the practice of intellectual courage is so essential. You might wonder, how do we actually train ourselves to be strong enough? Well, one simple habit is to practice what psychologists call intellectual humility. The constant awareness that we could be wrong. That means actively seeking out opposing views, not to torture ourselves, but to test the strength of what we believe. I know this is hard. I know it feels uncomfortable. But let me ask you, which is more painful in the long run? The discomfort of questioning yourself, or the devastation of realizing too late that you blindly believed a lie? Think about that. And if you can, write about a moment you realized you were wrong in the comments. It might encourage someone else to start questioning too. Let's also talk about one powerful mental practice: slowing down. Just slowing down. Before you react, before you post, before you forward that shocking video. Breathe. Check. Wait. Verify. Because algorithms feed on speed, and every pause you take is a victory for your independent mind. I'd like to give you a modern scenario to reflect on. Imagine a young doctor, fresh from medical school, confident, respected. Then a crisis hits. A pandemic, let's say. In the stress and chaos, that doctor starts sharing articles from questionable sources, convinced they are protecting their patients. Their intention is good, but they fall prey to what Bonhoeffer described: functional stupidity dressed up as moral duty. This is not just a story from 1940s Germany. This is a story from our timeline, from our neighbours, maybe even from ourselves. And what about politics? Have you ever supported a policy, only to discover later it was built on half-truths? Maybe you felt ashamed or defensive. That's normal. Our brains are wired to protect our ego. But growth happens when you refuse to let ego be your master. Bonhoeffer would say, that moment of doubt is where courage begins. He knew that intellectual courage was not a one-time act of heroism, but a daily discipline. It is like building mental muscles. You don't lift the heaviest weight on day one. You start small. Read one perspective that challenges you. Talk to one person with whom you disagree. Pause before you share a viral meme. Each repetition, no matter how small, strengthens your capacity for honest thought. If you can, I'd love to hear one way you practice intellectual humility. Do you have a routine for challenging your own ideas? Comment and inspire others. Because we are stronger together, and showing vulnerability is not weakness. It's the first step to real wisdom. And there's more. We cannot ignore how our economic and political structures contribute to this problem. When people live in constant stress, worrying about bills, housing, medical care, they have far less energy for critical thinking. The brain prioritizes survival over truth. So one of the best ways a society can defend independent thought is to reduce economic and social stresses. I invite you to imagine this. A society where people have decent healthcare, stable housing, fair wages. Think of how much more mental energy they could use to discuss ethics, politics, philosophy, science, instead of worrying about next month's rent. Doesn't that sound like a society worth building? Tell me in the comments, what structural change do you think could best support critical thinking? Bonhoeffer could never have predicted artificial intelligence, deep fakes, or personalized algorithms. But he understood something timeless. Whenever we stop thinking, we stop being free. And the tragedy is, surrendering your mind can actually feel like freedom. Because you don't have to wrestle with contradictions, you don't have to tolerate uncertainty, you just go along. But that is not freedom. That is slavery in disguise. Today, every time you choose evidence over emotion, questions over assumptions, you reclaim a little piece of that freedom. And if millions of us did it together, we might protect what Bonhoeffer died defending: the human ability to think carefully, even when it hurts. So I challenge you right now. This week, find a belief you are absolutely certain about and go look for the strongest argument against it. Sit with the discomfort. Breathe through it. If your belief survives, you'll be wiser. If it doesn't, you will be freer. At the end of this video, I want you to remember the future of human wisdom depends on us refusing to surrender our minds. In a world where profit depends on our quick reactions and shallow certainty, the most radical act you can perform is to slow down and think deeply. If this video made you question even one assumption you hold, share it. Let's keep this conversation alive. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, because next time we'll go even deeper into how philosophy and psychology can heal us in an age of confusion. What's one belief you're willing to challenge this week? Let me know below, and let's keep building a culture of thoughtful courage together.